Hello, my soul seeking friends. It's Shanna. Thank you so much for listening to Sense of Soul podcast. Enlightening conversations with like minded souls from around the world, sharing their journey of finding their light within, turning pain into purpose, and awakening to their true sense of soul. If you like what you hear, show me some love and rate, like, and subscribe. And consider becoming a Sense of Soul Patreon member, where you will get ad-free episodes, monthly circles, and much more. Now go grab your coffee, open your mind, heart, and soul. It's time to awaken. Today on Sense of Soul, I have Phill Webster. He is a writer, an actor, and a spiritual teacher. Phill is joining us today to tell us about his new book, Letting Glow, a guide to intuition, spirituality, and living consciously. And he's here to share with us the journey behind writing this book. So please welcome Phill Webster. Thank you so much for being with me. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks.
First of all, I love the title of your book, Letting Glow.
Thank you.
I found that a lot of the things in your bio for myself, I can relate to, like looking back at my younger self and seeing that, wow, I always had this in me, yet it was never developed, or I was never guided to use like intuition or like see synchronicity and signs. Like it was just like passed off as coincidence or nothing. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I'd love to know more about how you came into this
Sure,
and
yeah.
just how you got here.
Yeah, sure. I'm based in London. I lived abroad for around 20 years or something like that, and then came back to the UK around 2017. And I'd always kind of bounced around a lot, traveled around the world somewhat. I kind of never really found my thing, you know. I never sort of grew up thinking, okay, I want to be a fireman or a doctor or something like that. And I would sort of fall into different jobs and do different things. And then when I came back to the UK, I felt like a very big sense of sort of connecting with my roots, you know. And that kind of reminded me of like what I was into as a kid. And I was always obsessed with movies and stuff. And I thought, well, what would he want to do, right? If he could just do anything and start over. So I pursued acting. So I kind of went that route just for the sake of, you know, trying it out, and then started getting a few speaking parts and this and that, and paid the bills with it, and had some amazing experiences, worked with some great actors. But it never, again, it didn't really sort of scratch that itch. Like I saw myself on TV and I'm like, okay, yeah, no, now what? You know. And then around the start of 2021, I lost my mum. So she'd brought me up, and it pretty much just been me and her, and she'd lived alone for the last 20 years of her life. And of course, there was lockdown and all that stuff. So, you know, none of that was very fair on elderly people,
Yeah.
especially. And then, yeah, something happened around her passing, which really triggered the catalyst for writing this book. Yeah, so that's kind of my brief last few years.
That's one thing that humans all have in common. We're all going to experience loss because, there's the end of the road for each one of us well, when it comes to our meat suit.
Yeah.
But, when I lost my dad, I always say he gave me birth twice, once in my life and once in his death, because
Mm.
he was my rock. It was so just life changing for me. Yeah.
I'm sorry that for your loss. Yeah, no, but I really like that what you said there. My mum passing was has definitely sent me on a completely different trajectory to what I thought I was on, and and it really does change everything. You know, one thing I always say is, you know, like, and of course we all have different relationships with our parents, so I can't really say this across the board, but essentially, you know, your parents are really like the one true witnesses to your lives, you know,
Yeah.
and then when they've gone, it's like stepping into an alternate reality. You know, it was this one and then suddenly this one. And, you know, I thought I was prepared for it. My mom was getting older. She was 76 years old. She had various age related health problems. And I kind of, you know, was expecting it.
Yeah.
But still, it's just, you really don't know till you know, right?
Yeah.
And I think now it's getting towards the 3 year mark. I'm starting to finally feel that I can sort of, you know, move past it a bit and start going forward. But I really didn't expect how much it really beats you down. You know, I had no idea. You just reevaluate everything essentially. But
Yeah.
yeah, you know, I wouldn't have wrote the book if my mum was still here. It was really the catalyst around my mum passing to what really sent me down this path. So something happened around the night before she passed away. So I kind of wasn't really, I dipped my toe into sort of learning about esoteric experiences and spiritual practices and things like that over the years here and there. But at this time in life, it wasn't really something I was thinking so much about. So as I was saying, we'd just gone through COVID and I hadn't seen my mum for a couple of months. I was just getting ready to start work on this movie. And we'd just been through Christmas and through government lockdowns and everything. I hadn't seen her for, I didn't see her at Christmas and I hadn't seen her since November. So it'd been a while and we would FaceTime every day.
Oh,
And on this particular night, I think we'd FaceTime already 2 or 3 times that day. And she picked the phone up. So she would always keep her phone charging on the floor, right? And as she sort of leant over to pick the phone up, she was leaning in from one side of the screen. And then there was a man leaning in from the other side of the screen. And I was kind of like taken aback, right? It was like 9:30 at night, and she lived in a very rural place called the Isle of Wight, where I grew up. So, and again, we were in a lockdown, so I kind of knew all the neighbors, and no one should have been there. I kind of knew her daily routines and stuff like that. So I was kind of shocked. I was like, okay, well, who's that? And I saw him long enough that I could describe him. He was maybe in his 60s, had thinning grey hair, glasses, was kind of gaunt looking, and as she picked the phone up, he went out of shot. And she went and sat down, and I said, well, who is that? And she said, who is what? And I was like, okay. I was like, well, the guy, I just saw someone. She was like, no, there's no one here. And I was like, okay, this just threw me off completely. And I kind of grilled her a little bit, and she was like, no, there's not been anyone here all day. And I was like, well, okay, I know what I saw, but she wasn't giving any signs that there was anyone else there. And one thing that she would always do, which would drive me nuts when I was a kid, especially, was if we'd ever have a phone call and there'd be someone else there, it was impossible to have a conversation with her. She would start speaking more politely. She wouldn't be herself, and I'd be like, okay, come on. And she wasn't doing any of that. And then we spoke for like another 45 minutes, and I just thought, okay, well, I didn't believe there was anyone with her, physically with her. And I thought, well, I must have
yeah.
been mistaken. So I just dismissed it and then went to bed that night. And then the next morning, I got the phone call that she'd had a heart attack and passed. Like a neighbor was trying to get into the house. So again, that event was really the catalyst that sent me sort of down this rabbit hole of looking into, more sort of esoteric experiences. And it also made me look back at other things that had happened over my own life, little instances that are dismissed, or some bigger ones also that didn't really sort of fit in with everyday reality. And I've been like, okay, well, that was weird, but I don't know what to do with that. So I just kind of brushed it aside. But this was a big one.
Yeah.
And, if kind of my headspace had been then where it is now, I would have been like, okay, well, that's somebody letting me know, like something's up here. And I would have gone straight down there. Yeah, so again, that changed everything, as well as going through the grieving process of losing my mom and all that comes with that. And this experience kept at the back of my mind, well, what was that? Who was that guy? And eventually, I spoke to a couple of people. Some people were saying, well, you were just grieving. And I was like, well, I wasn't grieving. It was
Yeah.
it was before the fact, right? And then somebody suggested that I start asking for signs. And I did, and I started getting them.
What was your spiritual life growing up as a kid? I mean, like, did your mom have a spiritual practice at all? Were you guys
No,
counseling
not
or something?
not really. See, we never really something we never really spoke about, regretfully.
Okay.
There's so many regrets, so many
Mm,
things I wish I'd talked to her about. And that's really something that I do say to everyone that's got a good relationship with their, or even not a good relationship with their parents. Really,
yeah.
like, ask them everything that you can think of, because you can't at some point. But no, not really. We didn't go to church. We didn't really talk about these things. She did tell me about a couple of experiences she had when she gave birth to me. She talked about seeing her own mum, like when my mum nearly lost her life during that. But again, we didn't really sort of dive into it. I believe that she believed in something more, but again, never really explored it with her. So yeah, I didn't particularly have a very religious upbringing, and not a very spiritual one.
Okay. That's interesting because, for the longest time, I've been grieving my religion. I've been shedding, almost brainwashed, right, in many ways.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see a kind of like a different perspective from someone who really just had a clean slate of what they want their beliefs to be.
That's an interesting observation as well. Yeah, thank you for that. I'll take that one on board. Yeah, because that's the thing. I kind of would always, as a kid, I sort of was interested in ghosts and things like that. And I think I remember things sort of happening around the house, maybe paranormal things. And then I kind of as I got older, I thought, well, did that stuff really happen? Or was it just like, a kid's imagination? And a couple of other events that I just kind of, as I got older, they didn't really sit in my memory the same way that everything else does. And I just kind of just put it to bed. Yeah, I didn't really know what to do with any of that. And then not really having a very, well, not a strong religious upbringing at
Right.
all. Yeah, I never really had anything to sort of, I don't know, fall back on or sort of reassure me or this or that. So yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. Yeah, clean slate. Yeah.
Yeah, which is I oftentimes carry guilt, the fact that I was going to choose my children's religion before they were born. I did. To me
Mm.
now, that's insane.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, we live and learn, right?
Yeah,
Sorry to
yeah,
throw a
yeah.
cliche out, but
Yeah, my
yeah.
older kids kind of got screwed with the mom who I am, who I turned out to be. But everything happens for a reason, and they
I mean,
definitely still are, growing in their own journey. So when you mentioned earlier that as a kid, though, you liked films and stuff like that, what kind of films were you into? Like Star Wars or like Freddy Krueger, or what
pretty
did you?
much all of those. Yeah. So yeah, it was the 80s. And yeah, I had a pretty tumultuous upbringing. Like my mom and dad split up. My dad was quite abusive towards my mom. Well, he was very abusive towards my mom. And then when I was 8, we went and lived with an old flame of hers. She was kind of that era, her age. She kind of at the time thought that she needed, or I needed a father figure or something, and she thought that it's the right thing to do. Me and the stepfather of mine, we didn't really see eye to eye. So yeah, I would sort of find escapism through movies or books or anything like that to just kind of step away from this. It wasn't the worst upbringing, but it was difficult from time to time. So yeah, I would just sort of escape in any kind of fantasy thing, like yeah, all that stuff. I'm lucky to have grown up in the 80s because we had all those big movies that we had. So yeah, that kind of was my way out. Yeah.
One of my favorite movies was Labyrinth.
Right.
Love Labyrinth.
I've never seen it, saying that I'm a kid of the 80s. Yeah, I've never seen it.
Well, it'd still be good if you watched it because
Yeah, I
David
bet.
David Bowie is awesome, and it's just I don't know. There's a lot. It's an allegorical story in so many ways. Well, a lot of movies are.
Mm.
Yeah, teaching you something, and in that realm of possibilities or limitless. I feel that we've not been taught that that is actually a possibility for us too.
Yeah, definitely. Like recently, I've been very much caught up in this book promotion thing, and I've kind of gone away from sort of my more the spiritual direction that I was heading, meditating a lot. I joined a development circle around mediumship, and then yeah, sort of more practical things have taken my attention away. It is kind of good to remind yourself that actually, yeah, we are we're painting this picture, right? And not just
Yeah.
sort of getting caught up in all the distractions and yeah, which is so easy to do. Yeah.
So you talked about signs, you asked for signs. Through my journey, I would say that as I became present, if we want to say awakened, which I've awakened a gazillion times, so it's hard to say there's just one spiritual awakening, but I have been led by signs and synchronicities. And,
Yeah.
at first thinking they were so shocking. And, I'm like, so excited about them. And now they're just like, if they don't happen throughout the day, I get a little worried.
Right.
So what kind of signs and synchronicities were was showing up for you, and how? Because, we all receive differently. I'm very
Yeah.
clairvoyant, so I feel like I really see them.
So after losing my mum, I was working on this movie and I just kind of was burying my head in books. And I remembered a couple of books that had helped me along the way. And actually, I remember you recently had Neil Donald Walsh on your podcast, which are amazing hero of, I remember reading Conversations with God when I was 25. And he'd wrote one, I think it was called At Home with God, which I'd read whenever it came out a long time ago, 15, 20 years ago. And thinking, okay, I need to read that again, because that was just talking about the process of dying and that we don't die. And like I said, this wasn't something I'd really thought of for years. And I remember that book, I was like, okay, I need to read that again because that's just going to help. And then talking to somebody on this film set and telling them the story that I just told you, and this lady, she suggested, yeah, she was like, oh, you should just definitely start asking for signs. And it kind of crossed my mind, and I thought, well, what if I ask for one and I don't get one? Then what? Then what
Yeah.
does that all mean? Then that thing, maybe that wasn't a real thing. I don't know. I was kind of afraid to. During this time, yeah, we'd just moved into a new apartment in London, And well, I should say my partner had pretty much moved us in because I was on this movie every day. And then I had a day off and I was putting Blu-rays away, right? They're kind of obsolete now. We've got streaming services, but I had like a stack of them in a box. And I'd got all these, and I must mention, forgive me, I was working on one of these big Marvel superhero movies, right? It was called Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. So it was like a sequel to Doctor Strange. That was the movie that I was on at the time, and there's a point to that. So I got these Marvel movies in my Blu-ray collection, and I was putting them all away. And as I did, I thought, oh yeah, okay, so let's do this. I was like, okay, Mom, if you're around, give me a sign, right? And then I went back to organizing everything. And as I put these Blu-rays away, I noticed that one was missing, and it was Doctor Strange, like the first movie to the sequel that I was working on.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, well, and I remember just being more annoyed than anything. I was like, okay, they're all here. Where's that one? Everything should be in the same box, right? And then I went about tidying the rest of the flat, and I hadn't really, I kind of forgot about this asking for a sign thing.
Yeah.
And maybe an hour later, at the other side of the place, there was a stack of books, and this Blu-ray Doctor Strange was sitting on top of the stack of books. And then the author's name was poking out from the book right underneath the Blu-ray. And all I could see was Maureen, which was my mum's name. And then the title of the book underneath that part of the title was poking out and it said Living. So I've got Doctor Strange, Maureen, and Living. And I thought, okay, I don't know. Immediately, the cynic in me was like, I don't know. But then on the other hand, I was like, well, I did just ask for a sign, you know? And then a little bit later on, I came across a book by a medium called Claire Broad. And interestingly, and again, put it down to coincidence at the time. So I didn't look the lady up or anything like that. I just liked the title of the book. It was called What the Dead Are Dying to Teach Us. And I didn't know where she's from. She could have been from the States. She could have been from Australia or anywhere. And the first page in the book took place across the street from where I was living. Like I could look out the window and she was talking about a cemetery in a place called Richmond in London. And it's like literally across the street. And I was like, well, what are the chances of that, you know? But again, just sort of dismissed it and read the book. And anyway, that kind of started getting me thinking about mediumship. A little bit later, I wandered down the road and I walked past a spiritualist church in my area. And I didn't know what a spiritualist church was at the time. I don't know if you guys have a few of them there. They're very much leaning towards spiritualism and mediumship, essentially. And there was a notice board outside that said that every Sunday there was a demonstration of mediumship. And I knew what that was at this point. And I was like, all right, well, let's do it. Let's go check it out, you know? So I went along and I didn't know how this thing worked, right? And weirdly, I'd set all of my social media stuff to private and everything. I don't know how I thought that somebody knew I was going to show up there. I don't know what I was thinking, but I was straight off the bat. I was like, need to be careful of these people. I don't know. Right? And I went in and, you know, no money exchanged hands, anything like that. And there was a small congregation there of maybe 15 people. And there was a lady there, the medium that night was a lady called Janet Neville. And she started working her way around the room. And people started confirming everything she was saying. She started talking to a lady and she was saying, okay, I'm seeing a house in Scotland. She said this name of a town in Scotland, which she claimed she'd never heard of before. And this lady was confirming everything. She was like, oh, yeah, that's my husband's family's house that you're describing. And I've seen pictures of it and this and that. And I was like, okay. And she worked her way around and she was getting like 90% of everything right. And I was kind of opening up more to this idea. I mean, I was there hoping to hear from my mom, obviously, right? But still, I was kind of really being really strict. Like, okay, I'm not falling for anything. And then eventually she got to me and she immediately started talking about a young man or somebody that had passed in his 20s. And I was thinking, well, I had no idea what she was talking about, right? She kept on about him. And then she said something interesting. She said, oh, you know, she said, you're a medium. I said, well, no, you know, not, you know, she said, well, yeah, she was like, you know, keep an eye on that, right? And she started talking about me being a voice for spirit, is how she put it. And sort of kept going on about it. And this guy, whoever she supposedly had, was saying, yeah, you know, you're going to be doing this someday. And I just didn't know who she was talking about. Eventually, the penny dropped. She talked about us going to college together. And I was like, it suddenly hit me. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I know exactly who she's talking about. Somebody that had tragically died when I think he was 20, I was a little bit younger. And he'd kind of fallen in with the wrong crowd. Drugs were involved, things like that. And I was like, oh, now I know who she's talking about. And then she said, oh, okay, I've got a lady that's just recently passed, like an elderly lady, and described my mom. And then the game changer for me was suddenly her accent changed and she started speaking with my mum's accent, right? And so this lady had like a
Wow.
very Cockney London Southern English accent,
Uh-huh.
and then she suddenly switched to this very Northern accent, which was my mum's accent, and sort of very briefly described her passing, and that she said, it was amazing, it was wonderful, she said, and that she's with me, and yeah, and that just I choked up, my heart started racing, and again that really changed everything, right? I was kind of on the fence with this stuff. I mean, I believed enough to go along, but the accent changing, that was like, okay, that was my mum's voice that I heard, right?
Right.
Yeah, and it really did change everything. And then it just sent me down this deep rabbit hole of looking into specifically mediumship and learning about mediumship.
It's truly amazing. I mean, like similar after my dad died, I had an opportunity. My friend had asked me if I wanted to go see Deb Shepherd, who I've had on my podcast. And it was this huge event. Here, my dad came through, and I knew that he would. It's kind of like I knew before I went. I was like, I
Mm.
know. And the stuff that she said, it's not like she said, oh, your mother passed and all these things happened. She was
Yeah.
right on, even said, like, did you lose a little dog? Because I'm seeing a little dog around him too. My dog died 2 weeks after my dad. I mean,
Mm,
these
mm.
specific things, unless she researched me or listened to my podcast, I mean, I don't know how, she would have known
Yeah.
those things. And
Yeah.
so, and it kind of goes back for me where, I grew up, it wasn't necessarily that I was a skeptic. I just had a strong belief system, and you didn't mess with that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was, I stopped believing what I was being told, and I started to live by my experiences. And,
Mm, mm.
that's what you're explaining. I mean, no one can take that experience away from you. This is your truth.
Well, that's it, and that's really what I wrote in the book. I'm not trying to sort of convince anyone. I can only give my own subjective experience and what's worked for me, and essentially started documenting my journey from those stories through learning about mediumship myself, and just sort of documenting what's worked for me. There's lots of meditations in the book. I found that finding meditation was just again, I've got to stop using the term game changer. I think something better to say,
Gotta come up with
but
something different. Yeah,
yeah.
I feel that way all the time.
But yeah, again, I feel that that's really the key to unlocking mediumship if somebody was interested to go down that path. But it's also just been opening things up to just really connecting with, not getting swept up in your thoughts, not getting, getting attached to emotions that come with thoughts, and being able to step back in meditation and just kind of observe those thoughts passing by and realizing that we're kind of, this separate thing back here.
Yes, the
Um,
witness. Hmm.
Right, exactly. Like consciousness or the backseat driver or however you want to look at it. And I remember that sort of really connecting to me to, again, going back to childhood. I just remember having this sense of this. I remember talking to a kid when I was like 7 or 8 and saying, "Oh, do you ever get this sense of like I am me?" And he was like, "Yeah, yeah, 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 I know what you mean." And I was thinking, he doesn't know what I mean, right? Right. But I couldn't articulate it. And I realized now that I was describing consciousness, being able to step back from your thoughts and realizing that you're this separate thing that doesn't have to get swept up in all of the drama, which we all do. And yeah, meditation has really been such a learning experience for me to be able to separate that.
When you relax the body and you quiet the mind, like what
Mm.
is left is truly your most realist essence of yourself, your soul, yours. That's where you sense your soul, your higher
Absolutely.
consciousness,
Yeah.
however you look at it, the witness. And it's almost like this space where it gets to explore and play and be free,
Mm,
from this body, from this monkey mind.
mm, mm.
So it's limitless. I love it.
Yeah, me too. And even though I've wrote a whole book about it and there's a meditation pretty much every chapter, I'm still guilty of neglecting it.
Yeah,
You
I
get
know.
caught up in this and that. We have to go to work. We've got to pay the bills and all those kind of things. But yeah, I feel that it's so beneficial to just take that time, even if it's like 5, 10 minutes every other day. I feel that things start to sort of flow a lot better, right? And when you can tap into your intuition. And again, another thing I often say is, we all have these moments of walking into a room and being able to cut the air with a knife where someone's had an argument, or we can't quite put our finger on something and we have a gut feeling, and we have all these terms that we use. But typically when you start using words like clairsentience or clairaudience or sixth sense, then people kind of just dismiss you like you're nuts,
True.
right? But I think it's just like semantics. We're talking about the same thing. And
Yes.
again, going back to meditation, I feel that when you can sort of tap into your intuition
Mhm.
or your consciousness or your soul, whatever words we want to use, then that's really the key. That when you start going with that,
It
and of
is.
course it takes some time, right? It's not. I think there's also a fine line between sort of intuition and impulse. So
Mhm.
it's I always talk about sort of, I feel that when you get practiced in meditating and recognizing the intuition and going with what comes first rather than before the doubts and questions come in, then that typically tends to be the right thing. But there is also a balance of recognizing that and not just sort of going on impulse as well.
Yeah, those things that are coming in those moments are really important for you to become witness to hear,
Mm-hmm.
to listen. It's part of the journey. Acknowledge those thoughts that are coming in. I know for me, that was one of the biggest things that happened. I saw that I was talking shit to myself. And I
Right.
was like, wait, who's saying that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
didn't come here, you talking shit to yourself.
Yeah, no, that's it. And it continues, it doesn't. I'm sort of talking about these things and especially the books. I feel like I can write a lot better than I can talk. But
Me
I'm like
too.
writing like these things like I'm Yoda or something, and but still through the day, I'm still struggling with the things that we're all struggling with. And yeah, like you say, what can you do? The thoughts are going to come. And I feel that that's another thing that people think with meditation, that you really have to have this,
Yeah.
silent time. The thoughts are going to keep coming, just acknowledge them and then come back again, come back to the breath, come back
Yeah.
to the moment of now.
Yeah, we spend much of our time worrying about the future or worrying about the past, which doesn't
Yeah.
even exist.
Yeah, exactly. So these things that would happen over the years, I had a very profound one, maybe mid 30s, something like that. And it's kind of funny that I also managed to dismiss this one because this was somewhat life altering. But at the time, I was living in Helsinki and I was running bars and nightclubs. I was living kind of a hedonistic lifestyle, a little bit sort of very much self-absorbed, I would say, and I wasn't really sort of thinking of the bigger picture at the time. I was just doing what I thought was, what I called at the time fun,
Yeah.
and I was already too old to be living like that, to be honest with you. But anyway, but I'd woken up one particular morning and I don't know if I was hungover or not or whatever, most of the time I was in those days. And I just had this kind of thought, and it wasn't a new thought, but something shifted with it. And I was just thinking about time being non-linear. We only really have this moment of now, right? And just as I had it, everything suddenly fell away, like almost just in a terrifying way. All of a sudden, my sense of perception of time just disintegrated. Like all of a sudden, like the future and thoughts of the past just disintegrated, and it was like now, right? And people talk about connecting with the moment of now.
Been
That
like that on
times
mushrooms before. Easy.
right,
Yeah.
okay. It felt like a terrifying psychedelic experience. I'd never really dabbled with psychedelics or anything, here and there, like once or twice when I was 20 or something. But this was just out of the blue, and all of a sudden it was now, like now,
Yeah.
now, now, and I couldn't switch it off. And I was
Right.
like, okay,
Yep.
what? Right? And it was like almost as though I having like a depersonalized experience, like I was over here
Yeah.
observing myself or observing my thoughts. And it was terrifying. I have to say, it was terrifying. Like physically felt fear go through me, and I just got my act together. I put my headphones on. I went out for a walk. I thought I'll walk this off, and it just wouldn't stop. And I tried to go to work that night, and I could barely
Oh,
function. Right, it was just like now, now, now. It was relentless, and I just couldn't like drift off to think, oh, what did I do earlier, or what am I going to do tonight?
yeah.
It just seemed absurd. And the thing is, it just kept going on, and it kept going on, and it went on for weeks. And I eventually went to a doctor and tried to explain this, and they were like, "Oh, well, this sounds like psychosis." And I was like, "Okay, that doesn't help, right?" And
Yeah.
they put me on a bunch of like anti-anxiety pills, some sleeping pills, stuff like that. None of it worked. The sleeping pills would knock me out, but I would wake up and it would just start all over again. It just didn't touch it, and I was truly scared. I started thinking, "Okay, this isn't stopping." This was weeks later. Went to see another doctor, same diagnosis, psychosis. He said, albeit mild, because I was still sort of somewhat functioning, going to work, stuff like that. But I feel like the best way I could describe it, like I was hanging on to like a slippery bar, right, of
Mhm.
reality, and barely sort of keeping my grip on things. And it was terrifying. And months into it, of just trying to explain this to people and just kind of getting this very sympathetic look, that people are like, okay. And I knew I
Yeah.
sounded nuts. I just couldn't explain what it
Right.
yeah, I finally found a psychiatrist, and what interested me in him was that he was also a hypnotist. So I was like, okay, I
Ah,
see this dude, hypnotize it away, right? I don't want this anymore. I want to get back to the herd. I want to go to work. I want to worry about
yeah.
this or that, right? And he listened to me and he was like, he said, no, no, no. He's like, you're fine, man. He said, like, you're not psychotic. He says, you're having an awakening, right? And he started talking about things called shamanic sickness, and he used the word mystic. And I remember feeling really awkward. I was like, okay, well, I don't care. Just
This is
make
a
this
cool
stop.
therapist.
Yeah, well, yeah. I feel like,
Yeah.
like the one therapist that out of 100 or whatever, that would
Mhm.
have gone the medical route, and this guy was like, no, 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 man. He was like an old hippie or something,
Yeah.
and he gave me a couple of meditations, very basic meditations, and this was really my introduction to meditation, and they brought me back, and it took some time, but
Yeah.
just through that, no drugs, no talking of psychosis. He was like, no, this is an awakening. You're in spiritual crisis. You're really seeing reality for what it is. And I would do these meditations every day, and very, very gradually, I would have like one good day. A couple of weeks later, it'd be 2 good days, and so on until I was kind of back online or offline, depending on how you look at things. But yeah, and it took the better part of a year to sort of come back. And as soon as I did, I was a lot more, my ego had been smashed to pieces. I kind of started concentrating on what I thought was more important. Moved back to the UK at that point, and that's kind of where I really sort of thought about, okay, well, actually, what do I really want to do? And where the acting thing came in. But yeah, it changed everything, and again, just sort of from this perspective now, these experiences just, I mean, that was a pretty profound one. But every few years, it would seem that something would come along, and I thought, okay, well, maybe it's time I start taking notice of these things, and again, that's where the book came from.
That's incredible. I feel like, I mean, I'd like to know your opinion on really truly what that was. But I mean, do you feel like in some way, because you said you kind of like were seeing yourself, like there was this witness, like your higher self. Do you
Hmm.
think that, because I've had stuff like that, not like that, but similar, that the only way that I'd be able to describe it, it's hard to put words to it. That's why I'm like, I can't even find words to even,
Well, yeah,
express
that's it.
this. But
Yeah.
that possibly it's like my higher self or maybe even my future self, like trying to nudge me or to lead me into where I need to be.
Yeah, I feel like I'm not smart enough to figure it out. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I've had like insights, and again, just going back to the books, Letting Glow was really more my, the documenting what pretty much what I'm telling you, and then I wrote a second book straight off that, which kind of went into bigger things. I started learning from a couple of indigenous shamans, and just sort of diving into this as much as I could. And I felt like I'd learned so much that there was another book there. And I also just going to go out on a limb, and I believe that some of it was channeled, right? I would look back on it and be like, okay, that's not me. That's way smarter than me. And
Yeah.
I feel like yeah, I feel like I've had some insights into these things there, but it's just such a, like you said, I could read from the book, but I off the top of my head, I can't really articulate it. Talking
Yeah.
about time and multiple dimensions and all these possibilities that, are we living all these different lives
Yeah.
at the same time somewhere else? It's a whole other thing. Like, it's another
Yeah.
hour of conversation.
Yeah. Or, right. Or I thought about to myself, am I remembering something? You
Mm.
know, am I awake? Like, did something shift? Or did I create somehow enough space within me, enough light that now I'm remembering myself on a soul level? I mean, I
Mm.
did do a lot of ancestral healing. I feel like, I moved past that kind of like physical healing that needed to be done in my DNA. And now I've got more space for light. And so now what's happening is, because I mean, I have a lot of synchronicity. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
huge part of my journey. I'd say, if you had to say what's your gift or whatever, it's synchronicity. It's me somehow working with my environment to lead. I mean, some of it's been downright scary and horrific.
Mm.
I don't know if you heard, I mean, I had a dead dove like literally die on my porch right in front of my eyes. And then
Okay.
like 2 weeks later, one born on my porch.
Oh, wow.
I mean, just weird stuff. But the synchronicity was I'd been writing in my book and in my mini series all about a dove. So, I mean, it just, stuff like that. I mean, it's just, there's, and like your stories, I mean, some of these things are just like, there's no way they're coincidence. I mean, there's no way. There's something definitely sending signs from the other side, whether it's my higher self, my future self, source, that I don't know. But and I don't know if I'll ever know, but I'm such a seeker. I'm always trying to figure it out, of course, and having these conversations just makes me wonder other people's perspective.
I don't know if I'm on the sort of same track, but what just struck me then is that you talking about that made me sort of think, you're doing this, you're living this,
Yeah.
I think we've something that came through recently was talking, and again, I just read back on this later and don't remember writing it at all, right? And it was talking about, having a responsibility at this point. And I feel like I need to get back to it. I've somewhat been shoving it aside and doing podcast interviews, radio interviews, stuff like that.
Yeah, right.
And it's kind of taken me away a little bit from what we're talking about. And you've got such a great platform and you're living it, right? And I think we do, when we realize these things, when we open up to these things, and now, we've both got a voice for this, then there is an element of responsibility that comes with it. And I got to say, you're doing a great job.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Another weird thing that just happened. God, I want to say it was yesterday. I swear we're so much far more powerful than we know. So my son, who's autistic, who I've told you about already, he's having a really hard time. So he gets really obsessed with things. And when they don't go his way, it's not that he's a brat. He doesn't require much. I mean, he likes Frosted Flakes. He likes Subway. There's certain things, but if Subway were to close down or Frosted Flakes were no more, it would be an issue.
Yeah.
He likes WWE. There was this one time I switched carriers, and we were getting it an hour later. That was an issue for him.
Yeah.
I mean, I had to switch back because it was an issue for him. Otherwise, this kid is the easiest one I have out of all of them, easily. Right. But one thing that is Marvel, he even wanted to do a podcast on Marvel. So I think I can tell you that it's been 100 and maybe 22 days. He tells me every day, this is a big part of my life right now, that there is a strike going on. And he is extremely, extremely concerned. Every day he screams, he follows it. And people don't, I mean, this is like affecting all of our lives right now because of him, because he's such a hardcore fan. And so I literally said yesterday morning, I actually said to my older kid, I said, I wonder if I know somebody who I can express this to, how much this is affecting him. And then I sat there and racked my brain of the people that maybe I would know, to be able to just share with them how they don't realize how much it affects those who love what they do.
Yeah.
Is really affecting their fans and even their families who don't have a clue, what these movies are. But that's his life, to go to movies and to follow this stuff. So
that's it. It's gonna be a thing. There's not gonna be any content like in the next year or two because no one's filming anything right now. So there will be like this other stretch, like when we were in COVID lockdowns and all the rest of it, where they'll be rerunning The Empire Strikes Back and stuff like that, because there's no big Hollywood movies because of this strike. But I kind of get the strike as well. But I don't think they realize how much it affects.
He doesn't require much. He really doesn't. It's really got him trapped inside of his mind. And that's the one thing. This kid understands energy like nobody else, because he has no ego to tell him, no, that doesn't exist. He believes in it.
Yeah.
And when he was in high school and I said, imagine that you have a superhero force field around you and you can walk down those halls. He did it and it worked,
Yeah. I do that sometimes myself. For real, like so many people here, like in London, like sometimes I'm thinking, okay, I need some boundaries here, like as central London is Crazy.
Especially as you start to awaken into those spidey senses.
Yeah, like I moved into this place very recently, or within the last year, and it's right across the road from a train station. And I've got a shortcut which takes me into the town if I go through the train station, right? And I would leave the flat in a good mood and then get through the train station. I'd be like, God damn it, like, just done with people for the day already, right? And I was thinking, what's my problem? Like, why, and then somebody pointed out that, like you just said, yeah, well, you're opening up to this stuff, that everything's energy. You're walking through this train station where people are, going and coming from work and you're just sort of picking up on it. So it's been something that I've, tried to be a bit more mindful of.
Yeah. At one point, I thought maybe it was just me that could then like feel people's pain and all these things. And then I realized, no, we're all like empaths.
No, definitely. Especially like in a place like this. I mean, I said central London. I'm not in central London. I'm in West. So there is an element of countryside and stuff like that where you can kind of escape to, thankfully. But yeah, we do pick it up, like no doubt about it, right? Again, I keep bringing it up because I've been guilty of it myself, just getting swept up in the everyday mundane and getting caught up thinking I need to do this and need to do that. And before you know it, you're just sort of like wrapped all up in it again. Yeah. And that's really when you really should take that time to step back.
You can either be conscious to it or unconscious to it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so very much for coming on Sense of Soul.
Oh, yeah, it's been an honor. I listened to your podcast and really enjoyed the episodes. Yeah.
Tell everybody where they can find you and where they can get your book.
Yeah, sure. So the book's available everywhere, all the usual bookstores. If they haven't got it, then they can order it. Obviously, Amazon is sort of the go-to. It's called Letting Glow. I'm most reachable on Instagram, Phill Webster with 2 L's. And then I've got a website, phillwebster.com, again, with Phill with 2 L's.
Well, thanks so much for sharing your story, being vulnerable.
Really nice speaking with you. Yeah, interesting conversation. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Sense of Soul podcast, and thanks to our special guests for joining me. If you want more of Sense of Soul, check out my website at www.mysenseofsoul.com, where you can work with me one-on-one or help support Sense of Soul podcast by donating to my coffee fund. Thanks for listening.